Hello, dear friends. My name is Oladele Ayorinde. I'm happy to welcome you again to the Organ House Concert and Seminar Series today. Thank you for joining us. Today is a special day, and we can say today is the deal or the main day. Last week was a kind of insightful launching or invitation into another level, another perspective, or another world of digital technology, particularly the nexus or the intersection, or we can say relationship between digital technology and the promotion or sustaining or sustainable culture, art and culture in Nigeria and across different contexts in Africa. So, our guest last week and today is no other person than Dr. Tunde Adegbola. Dr. Adegbola, you are welcome again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the insightful presentation last week.
Thank you.
Perhaps you might want to introduce yourself again, particularly to some of our friends who are joining for the first time today.
Thank you. My name is Tunde Adegbola. I'm Executive Director of African Languages Technology Initiative. We make computers usable in African languages. Of course, my background is in technology, but my passion is in the humanities.
Thank you, sir. Welcome. Okay, friends and colleagues. Last week, we started with an introductory episode that focuses on promotion of sustainable art and culture through the means of technology or the machineries or logic of technology. So today and last week, just a moment for those who were not around last week. Last week, Dr. Adegbola took us into the genesis, I can say, from the Nigerian perspective through the Yoruba example, the foundation or background, of digital technology, what it means locally, globally, and the way it constitutes a common reference point for cultures and civilization across the world. So Dr. Adegbola took us into the local context, bringing the notion of data, technology, and artificial intelligence, bringing it back home, using local examples, particularly Yoruba language and the Igbo language. I remember the idea of pa itan, pa alo, pa owe. For me, these were some of the highlights of the presentation last week and some of the internal logic, the codes that Dr. Adegbola unpacked for everyone last week. So today, we are moving into another layer of this conversation, of this discourse. So today, we are focusing, zooming into the relationship between artificial intelligence, digital technology, and, of course, music, particularly the relationship between digital technology on the one hand and the creative realm of music. I can say music composition, music production, music performances. The question is, what is the role of digital technology or artificial intelligence in today's world? What does it mean for music scholars, particularly for music composers? Can we rely on AI? What is the benefit of AI and digital technology in today's music studies or arts, language in general? Once again, thank you for joining us. As we unpack this level, kindly follow us, take time, and take note, because we are going to have more time today to engage Dr. Adegbola. But while you are waiting, let's hand over the baton to Dr. Adegbola. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So the question today then is, what is the nexus or relationship between AI, digital technology, and music as a whole, on the one hand? Then later I will come to the other layer.
Well, music is a human activity.
Yeah.
From my point of view, the production, the deliberate production of sounds
Okay.
according to prescribed rhythm, according to prescribed melody, according to prescribed harmony, such that it produces aesthetic value.
Wow.
Now, basically, we are talking here about the production of sound, which essentially is mechanical vibrations, just getting the air molecules to vibrate, which is what sound is. Now, to now do that deliberately according to rhythm, melody, harmony to produce aesthetic value, then we know that already we are talking of some level of order, some level of predictability, some level of also even surprise. And all these impinge on human intelligent behavior. And we now live in a world in which most things that we thought were the sole preserve of humans have been opened up to the extent that computers can now also take part in them. Computers can contribute. Computers are now in a state that they are capable of exhibiting what we describe as intelligent behavior. And that makes a whole lot of difference to what we used to understand as music production, what we used to understand as musical instruments, what we used to understand as production equipment. In those days, a tape recorder was a dedicated equipment used to record sounds. A record player was a dedicated equipment used to reproduce sounds. Musical instruments were dedicated equipment. But today, the computer can play the role of a recorder. It can play the role of a producer of music. It can play the role of various instruments. We can simulate the sounds of various instruments regardless of their timbre, such that we can almost exactly reproduce the trombone, which occupies specific space on on a handheld device. So these are some of the things that have affected the whole process of production and reproduction of music to the extent of even having effect on composition and performance of music.
Wow. Thank you so much. Then, if, according to you, music has now become a kind of, can now be transferred or reproduced through the means of technology or generated. You know, and now from your word, from your explanation, I'm thinking about idea of sampling. You know, and sampling this cut across musical genres, cultures across the world. We're talking about sampling dundun drum on a particular software, sampling different orchestral instrument into our pipe organ. You know, we now have digital pipe organ, we have digital organ here and there, we have piano keyboard. This, for instance, here on this keyboard, we could play the sound of trumpet, trombone. Then the question, that is on the one hand. Then our next point, or perhaps concern, then should now be, I think, before the next question, there's another one that I think we need to quickly, unpack a bit, is that I hope this is not taking the place of woman artistic, into the power of creativity. If digital technology or AI can now, although it has always been there, of course, but just that at the rate at which it is operating now is quite overwhelming. But if technology can sample without human effort and can produce almost reproducible in a different way, like you explained last week, then what is the role of woman, the human body, the human capacity I hope this is not taking the place of woman, activity in trying to transfer or reproduce sound. That is the fault. That's one hour I want us to unpack for now. Then we'll now come back to the idea of composition as a whole. But let's quickly unpack the idea of sampling, generative sound. So I hope this is not threatening human creativity in any way.
Well, I would say it's a paradox because once you say sampling is one approach.
Okay.
Generation, artificial generation of sound is another approach because sampling is actually recording a sound and then reproducing it, manipulating it and reproducing. On the other hand, you can actually generate these sounds artificially by understanding the sound mathematically and regenerating them with mathematical equations. Okay. Now, when you do that, we say you have generated the sounds artificially. Now, the root of artificial is art.
Okay.
So, and art is about creativity. So, what we say is taking our creativity in itself is a human creative thing. So that's the paradox about it. But the point I hear you making is, where does the human input into this thing stop and the machine takes over? The creativity in quotes of machines, are they likely to satisfy human aesthetics? Are they likely to so these are some of the questions we are asking here. And then along the line we are saying, are we not becoming redundant?
Yeah.
So all these are questions that did not arise today. They have always been. When photography was invented, people did say, the Leonardo da Vinci's of this world are in trouble. But today, a photograph is still different from a painting. And you are not likely to pay what you would pay for a painting for a photograph.
Okay.
Because there's an element of human involvement. So, and this is a recurring decimal. But we must admit that the juncture which we find ourselves now is a unique one. That of artificial intelligence. Before, it's been artificial instruments, artificial reproduction, but now it is artificial intelligence, to the extent that the machine is now beginning to behave like the human being. The machine is trying to produce as though a human would produce. You can even instruct the machine now, I want you to compose a piece for me according to Baroque tradition, or as against the classical tradition. And it will go ahead and do it. You can even say, even with some of our local genres, you can say, I want you to compose for me something along the Akbala tradition. And because it has examples of music that has been labeled as Akbala, it learns the intervals, it learns the modes, it learns the scales and all that, and reproduces according to these constraints. So anybody that claims to have the final answer in this situation is just setting himself up for an error very, very soon. But what I can say at least is that these are not questions that just arose today. We've been encountering them, we've been dealing with them, but the one that we are dealing with now is rather unusual.
Okay. Thank you so much. Then we're still coming back to this, but let's quickly move to perhaps the next point might help to further unpack this. Then the next one is it's now a common knowledge that some of you have, over the years, you have worked both within the language, Yoruba language and other Nigerian languages, And also, you have worked within the music industry also. But for now, I want to focus on your research on language, particularly the idea of speech surrogate. Yeah, because last week we were talking about possibilities and possible approaches, or perhaps they are still emerging, to decolonizing, or if perhaps if that word is quite a cliche, constitutes a form of cliche, we could use recreating, music or technology from the local perspective. So then the point is, from the compositional perspective or music making, perspective, how does speech surrogate, you know, how, what does it mean to engage speech surrogate as a compositional tool? From your own perspective, for instance, you have done a kind of what we can call coding of a sort for different software, but the speech themselves, they also have sonic resources that are musical, and they have other layers. But the question for now is, in terms of composition, in terms of music making, what is the place of speech surrogate in decolonizing or composing music that emerges from the perspective of African, let's say Yoruba for instance, and that speaks to local contexts that are also relevant to the global aesthetics, and tastes, or forms of, taste and listening and, meaning making?
Well, a speech surrogate is an instrument that can take the place of the human voice in producing speech. Let me just say that.
Okay.
And speech surrogacy is the process of using instruments other than the human voice to produce speech. And this talks about the concept of, for example, the talking drum.
Talking drum.
The fact that it can be bemusing to people who do not understand how tone languages work, that you say a drum can talk. The point is that in a language like Yoruba, the meaning in a word, the identification of a word, depends on three features: consonants, vowels, and tones. Now, each of them, there's a lot of meaning embedded in each of them. So when you use, because you can mimic the tone of language with a musical instrument, then we say that language has become a speech surrogate.
Okay.
Because by just mimicking the patterns of the pitch, then you are making music, but actually you are communicating as though you are speaking. Now, the implication of that to composition, for example, immediately hammers on the concept of what I describe as tonal integrity.
Tonal integrity. Okay.
Because the meaning of a Yoruba statement is also embedded in the tone of the speech, which in music can be interpreted as the melody of singing. So that when the tone goes in a particular direction, or has a particular trajectory, the melody of the song to which that line of speech is sung must also go in that direction. And this was a major problem with early Christian not even composers, Christian missionaries, which is the work I did with Dr. Tolu Owaje, looking at speech tone and music melody. when missionaries translated English hymns into Yoruba and sang them to the English tunes, to the European tunes, to the extent that Abide With Me was translated into Waba Migbe. But because of the pattern, the melody of the hymn tune, Eventide, Waba Migbe became Waba Migbe.
Okay.
Be is to abide, be is to petrify, is to go septic. So, because of the implication of the tones, Waba Migbe now became, come, let us go septic together. So, if, therefore, I mean, this led to a tradition in Yoruba composition, we generally referred to as the school of the native ear tradition, in which people like J.J. Ransom Kuti, T.K. Phillips, A.T. Olaolude, Olaolumideyi, and a group, I mean, wide range of period of musicianship in Yoruba church, started composing deliberately according to the Yoruba tradition of music. So there, the idea of speech surrogacy, which is the use of musical instruments as speech devices, and the idea of composing music that conform to the tonal patterns of speech. You now see that they are intertwined.
Yes.
So definitely, composing in that kind of tradition brings to the table this issue of speech surrogacy and tonal integrity. Tonal integrity, which is when there is integrity between the tone of speech and the melody of music.
Okay. I like the idea of tonal integrity then. Then, the question that tonal integrity poses then is that someone who is not a native speaker wouldn't be able to compose in for Yoruba, compose in Yoruba.
Maybe not necessarily a native speaker, somebody who is not adept at the Yoruba language.
Okay.
I mean, there was this very popular, I think, Swedish lady that sang the song, popular song, Kilo Leshe, Olorun mi, Kilo Leshe, Iwo ti o da na na. When she got to the second verse, Talo Julo, she just went ahead, Talo Julo, Talo Julo. Very few Yoruba people will sing that. They will say, Talo Julo, Olorun mi. But because she is used to this European strophic tradition of same tune for various verses, but in Yoruba, it doesn't work that way in that kind of context. So if you are not conscious of the power of tonality in the Yoruba language, you may not be able to sing Yoruba songs appropriately. More so, you may not be able to compose Yoruba songs in such a way that people will say, why is he speaking like a child?
Okay, thank you so much. Again, we are coming back to tonal integrity. But there's another layer to these ideas of tonal integrity from what you just explained now about preservation. Perhaps, I don't know if that is still a appropriate time today in 21st century. So we can say, how do we then engage sustainability? Maybe that's the word today. Sustain the Yoruba, this Yoruba tonal integrity. Let's put it that way, because in the midst of these changing tides, technology, generative, like you explained earlier, it is now possible for somebody to go to the system to use through computer to press one key and the other and generate something. But on the one hand, we all know that this is possible, could possibly constitute a kind of threat to the Yoruba itself. language in terms of speaking, like what we discussed last week, the sustainability of this culture. But how do we then tap into this tonal integrity as a technology, to promote and sustain Yoruba language, not just as a communicative device, but also as a kind of a realm, an artistic realm, like what you just explained, that even a simple word is enough to start writing symphony with a good understanding of that word. So that for me is not just about music anymore. It's now becoming a resources for composition, for music making, and other stuff around art. Then how do we sustain it through this tonal integrity?
We must first of all get to understand that computers, ICTs, intelligent machines will go whatever direction you allow them to go. They can be a threat, or they can be something that supports, something that promotes. It is all a matter of how the human being chooses to use them. Okay. Now, the core of present trends in technology that has brought artificial intelligence to the limelight is machine learning. The fact that it is now possible to teach machines, to train machines, for machines to learn. So whatever you give to the machine to learn from, the machine will learn from it. Now, the important thing, therefore, is to provide proper Yoruba data, proper language data, proper cultural data to the computer. And the computer will learn from it. And the computer then becomes a device for the promotion of culture. If otherwise you starve the computer of the necessary resources, then the computer learns what is not appropriate. The computer represents a culture in a way that is not right. And then, in that way, it becomes a threat to the culture. So the human is the one that is the human is the factor that is very, very important in this. Whatever becomes of these things, whether it becomes a threat to culture, or whether it becomes something that promotes and sustains culture, is all dependent on how we human beings choose to use it.
Thank you so much. Then how do we approach this data you just mentioned? How do we start? Where do we start from? Harvesting, if that's the word, data, curating data for digital technology. Where do we start from this context?
Well, more and more, we need to ensure that our activities, our daily activities, the events of our daily work find their way onto the global information infrastructure, alias the internet, so that there can be footprints of what we do day by day, our daily work, the things we do from time to time. We make sure that these things find their way into the global repository of data. The fact that a lot of what we do, a lot of our daily activities do not get captured in any way in the form of documentation or recording is part of the problem that we have with making this data available. We need to, first of all, be conscious that there is a need that our cultures, our activities, the events that we carry out from day to day, that they find their ways into the global repository. Probably we might even need policy positions from government's point of view to ensure that some of these things are done, because at the ordinary level we may not see the full implications of it. There's a Yoruba saying that always propels me when I remember these things. It says, "Eni wejule rumba." Ordinarily, it means if you can see into the future, you get scared of a lot of things. You get overwhelmed. But really, what it means is that if you are clairvoyant, you have a great responsibility. And if you understand that we are going down a slippery slope, if we do not ensure that our culture gets captured on the global information repository, we will lose out in the age of artificial intelligence. Already, there are clear indicators that we are losing out. Go to Google and Google the word grandmother. Nothing that will come out will look like yours. If you just Google grandmother, none of the grandmothers that we show on the screen will look like yours. And it's not the fault of Google. It is the fault of you and I that we have not allowed pictures of our grandmothers to be part of the global collection of grandmothers.
Representation.
Yes.
Coming back to representation.
Yes. So these are some of the issues that we need to address. And that's why I say maybe government policy will need to go into it such that whatever goes on radio, whatever goes on television, because these are some of the areas in which our culture gets recorded in these days, must be put in some repository somewhere. It must be recorded, must be part of what contributes to this new thing called big data.
Okay. Then the point then is, going back to the conversation last week, you explained that we have not made a kind of make it intentional of, curating and, we have not been in conversation with the global idea of, example you just made is grandmother. But what about the devices on a daily basis, the selfie, the Facebook, we have selfie, people posting their pictures at parties, at grandmother's birthday, schools, almost the everyday life is represented on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and all the platforms. People are there. It's very possible to type Oshodi Market. We are going to have series of conscious and unconscious, images that people have unconsciously deposited online. But what is the difference between this form of documentation approach to what you are talking about?
The main difference is that what you are talking about is largely done in English.
Okay.
A lot of it is done in English. Some of it is done in our local languages, but sometimes with inconsistent spellings.
Okay.
Spelling without tone marks.
Okay.
Spellings without subdots, to the extent that the computer becomes confused. When you write Shola, S-O-L-A, another occasion, S subdot O-L-A. Another occasion, S O high tone, mid tone, L high tone, Shola. Then various representations. Now, the computer may not realize that all these refer to the same entity. So these are some of these contradictions. And the contradictions sometimes come from the fact that it is not easy, it is not that straightforward to create content and have tone marks and write our languages in standard orthography. It is not very easy. So these are some of the things that need to be. I was really, really elated when the Honorable Minister for Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy
Yeah.
talked about the need to bring our languages into the digital economy. There are lots of things to do. There's an order in which these things need to be done. First and foremost, we must ensure that the global information infrastructure is aware of the nuances of our language, what we call the locale.
Yeah.
What are the segments of the day? For example, in English, you have AM, PM. I mean,
Yes.
in our own case, we have àárọ̀, ọ̀sán, àárọ̀, ìyálẹ̀ta, òrùnkàntàrí, ọ̀sán, alẹ́, àjìn, and on and on, ìyálẹ̀ta, and all that, and all that. So that is necessary. The way of our writing dates, things like that, those need to be catered for. Then we need to develop keyboards for our various languages so that it is easy to type those. Now, when that happens, then we can then say that things that go onto Facebook, things that go onto Instagram, and all this become part of the documentation of our culture. Not that somebody who is called Morolari spells their name as Morha, and all these funny things that we do. Inconsistencies. We are just frittering away our essence when we do all these kind of inconsistent things. I dare say it is an issue of government policy. If we don't want to continue to live at the periphery of the information society.
I think this is quite important, and I agree with you, because I'm now thinking about this idea of mark, the diametric marks, this Shola.
No, diacritic marks.
Yeah, the diacritic marks, for instance. Not only, in fact, this is not only relevant to Yoruba language, also the Igbo language. Also, for instance.
Of all the 512 odd languages spoken within the space called Nigeria, only one is not a tone language, and that's Fulfulde. Fulfulde is the only non-tone language in Nigeria. Even Hausa is tonal, because you find some words that have the same consonants and vowels, and the only way you can distinguish them is probably in context, but technically if you apply the tone mark. So all Igbo, Bibio, Birom, they are all tone languages. Wow. They have various levels of use of tones. Yeah. I mean, Yoruba, for example, uses three
layers,
three marked tones. Igbo, Ibibio, and a few other languages, for example, use what we call two tones and a downstep. That means it has two tones. You see two tones. Once in a while, you see what sounds like a mid-tone, a low and high. But you see what's like a mid-tone. But the mid-tone only occurs after a high tone. So it's kind of restricted.
Wow.
So you have all these kind of characters. There is a need to bring all these realities of our languages into what is known as the global scholarship on languages and how they affect natural language processing.
Wow.
On computers.
Yeah, I think that is quite insightful. And like you said earlier, Tuba Wejule Rumba. So we are getting to that level now. Where
so the clairvoyant has responsibility.
Exactly. We are responsible for this. So this is bringing us back to the idea of agency, the role of people. What I'm doing, what you are doing wherever you are, and how you are approaching your work, your education, your research, and the kind of consciousness that shape this cultural production, everyday life, is centered to this idea of reproduction and centering Nigerian, African, everyday life within the global, the emerging global discourse around technology, particularly representation. I think that is a word how are we representing? Because I'm just thinking right now, most of us that perhaps some of us, when we rise, we don't even come to the consciousness of even taking an effort, making effort to add those diametric marks. Diacritic marks. We are just just put it that way. People understand, and I think that's how we have been. People have been fashioned to think, to behave. It's normative to let's just do it anyhow. But I like the fact that you provide a kind of comparative explanation. Look at the Chinese. Look at the Asians. It is part of the way they live. All those marks are there, whatever they do. In fact, if you don't put it, they are not going to even communicate in the first place. Because if one mark is missing or one way of doing it is not well done, they are not going to relate until when it is properly done. I remember clearly in South Africa, I had an experience where the Chinese president came for a meeting, and I was surprised from afar. He wasn't speaking English. Somebody followed him. So whatever he was saying in Chinese language. And the young man following him around was trying to interpret instantly. I was just imagining, this is so serious. This is so intentional. So this is a kind of intentionality to which we are signposting, or we are bringing to the fore today, because we are so used to doing it the way we are doing, and the same product. What we are getting is a normal narrative. Everything is written in English. We have been anglicized, or how do they call it in music history? But the question now is going back to our idea of tonal integrity. You spoke about data. So data is number one, according to you. We need to start gathering data consciously. And I think then the question then is, in gathering this data through intentional acts, activities, processes, does that mean that it's intentional, of course, but the fact that it is not part of the policy is one thing? Because anybody can write Wale Soyinka anyhow they like. Anybody can write Fela Showande. Nobody's going to question you anyhow they like. Anybody can spell my name anyhow, even your name. But the fact that we see these things as normal, then my fear, because you're talking about the future now, and overall, how do we start correcting this? Do we need a special policy to start correcting this, or we need a different approach to education?
Well, first and foremost, anybody that makes a spelling error in English is dealt with as somebody who is not totally up there. But you are allowed to make spelling errors in Yoruba. It will behave as though it does not matter. But it does matter. The reason why there's pressure from society for spellings to be written in a particular way is is for consistency, so that there are no occasions for misinterpretation. But because we think that we can live our lives in a foreign language, we then don't put too much emphasis on our own language. Look, the fact that a person is capable of speaking a second language is a great advantage. It's a great advantage. But the advantage comes when the prayer that Yoruba people describe as "Mafi kan gba kan lọ́wọ́ mi" has been answered. That is, I'm asking God for something. May He not take something away from me and give me that I'm asking for. In an attempt to master English as a language of inter-ethnic communication, international communication, you don't want to end up deficient in the language that evolved within your environment and that language is the best to represent your environment. And that's why we think that, first of all, because we have impediments, the computer keyboards do not make it easy to write Yoruba according to standard orthography. And we then take that as excuse and expect people to, for our excuses to be accepted when we write with wrong spelling. So it's a matter of language status, a matter of our mentality as a people. What level of importance do we give our language and culture? So these are the issues at stake here. And until we correct some of these, we might not be making the kind of progress we think we should be making. I'm not aware. I'm not a historian. Maybe that's why I'm that deficient. I'm not aware of any people that became great having acquired another people's language and abandoned their own. I don't know of any. Maybe it's because I've not studied enough history.
Wow. Thank you so much. Then I think the point today is going back to the archive, going back to the roots of everything. Today, we are still with Dr. Tunde Adegbola, and as some of us have been following us, the question then today, and the focus today, is simply to navigate ways in which digital technology, artificial intelligence can help us promote, sustain Nigeria/African art and culture. How do we sustain it? So for him, and from what we have been, this is the second layer. From last week, what's the major point, the recurring theme and issues that have been emerging from Dr. Adegbola is the idea of local archive, data, the kind of data we produce, the kind of ideology that shapes our data. For instance, he just mentioned language. Then that is taking us back again. I think one can then suggest that, or just conclude that, some of your approaches can also be taken as decolonial approach, because people think to decolonize is simply to do some, theoretical stand, write a big paper, or contend physically or what with Western power. I think this basic approach, this basic step from language, from everyday life, are central to issues of decoloniality.
Well, you see, it is possible to act. It is possible to react.
Okay.
It is possible to be proactive. That's where the thing is. Are we acting? Or are we reacting? Or are we being proactive? I can assure you, with all emphasis at my disposal, that as of today, to create a telephone in which you are speaking Yoruba to a certain Chike, and the Chike is hearing you in Igbo, and Chike is speaking Igbo back to you, and you are hearing Yoruba, it's not rocket science. It's not, it is straightforward, it is simple, it can be done. There's enough technology for it. The reason why the technology doesn't, the reason why the technology exists, it's the product that doesn't exist. Because the reason why the product doesn't exist is that it is not important to those who are making products. But it is important to us. It is our reality that we live in a country where we speak very many languages. To take advantage of artificial intelligence, one of the things we need to do is to use this technology to bridge our linguistic gaps.
Okay.
We don't need to use artificial intelligence the way it is used in Europe. We don't have to. I said last week that technology answers questions raised by culture. It solves problems formulated by culture. Our reality is that we live in a multilingual society. It sometimes presents as a problem. Then there is enough technology to do it. So let us go ahead and use technology to solve the problem. Then, once we do that, we are being proactive. We are not saying, I'm an anti-colonialist. We are not reacting to the vestiges of colonization, but we are being proactive. We are addressing our problems using available technology, such that we are using available technology to answer questions raised by our culture, raised by cultural reality. So that for me is it.
I think the another point here, which is quite, we can say it's complex, but we still need to mention it, is the fact that can we then not, okay, I just want us to put it in this way. If we are going if we eventually decided or adopt some of these local approaches, would they still command economic power? This is what I mean. Look at BRICS. South Africa, India, Russia, Cuba, and which one again? Yeah, and Brazil. Thank you. And Brazil, there is an internal economic power strategies. So within these countries, there's an agreement on how to transact business, for instance, which privilege local conditions, languages. In South Africa, we have 11 official languages. 11. In India, there are a lot. In Brazil also. That is why locally for them, it is possible to go to Brazil and not even, one needs to, you might speak English to the first 5 people, and there won't be need for them to even respond to you, because it is not so important for them to speak, because there are other official languages which are recognized by their local economic structure and their economic strength areas. But in Nigeria, it's different. Even locally in Nigeria, there are places that when you speak your local language, one is gaslighted. Why? You are not intelligent. You are speaking Yoruba. You are supposed to speak good English. In fact, people might even lose job opportunity in our own local context. But even here in Ghana, they also have that kind of structure where local languages are central to economic negotiation and economic activities. Across their universities also, there are languages, different or indigenous languages are used for educational purposes. You can write your thesis on physics using Twi or Ga, for instance. In South Africa, you could write your entire thesis on physics and economics using Zulu language or Mapedi or Tonga in South Africa. The question is, we don't have that in Nigeria. And that's because of the kind of economic system that we are running. It's an economy that aspires to be like the person outside, that is modeled on the shadows from somewhere. Then how do we match this paradox with this reality that we are unpacking here?
Well, the culture and the economics is always a chicken and egg. The question is, which one comes from? Is it the economy that promotes the culture that promotes the economy? And as long as you are not able to address that, then you're always having this problem. I mean, only one university in Nigeria allows you to write a PhD thesis in a language other than English. And that only one university allows only one subject
Wow.
to be written in a language other than English. And that is Obafemi Awolowo University, allowing you to write a PhD thesis in Yoruba if you are studying Yoruba. Wow. Only. No other Nigerian university allows you to write a PhD thesis.
Even in Yoruba studies?
Even in Yoruba studies. To write a PhD thesis in Yoruba studies in the University of Ibadan, you have to write it in English. See, that is an expression of how important we hold ourselves. So that is talking about the culture now.
The culture.
And that reflects on the economy.
Yeah.
I have a theory which I've always pushed. I call it the theory of the man-dollar value of a language. What is the man-dollar value of a language? Usually, when you try to put languages in hierarchy, you put them in the hierarchy of number of speakers. Yeah, that is, it makes sense. But when you look at it closely, the more important hierarchy is not just the number of speakers, is the number of speakers multiplied by the number of dollars in the pocket of those speakers.
Yes. Exactly.
Because
that's what I mean.
Why do you speak? You speak to negotiate value. Do you really want to speak to somebody who doesn't have anything in their pockets? So that is where the man-dollar of a language comes. Now, when you have a language like, say, Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, Ibibio, Twi, and the population of speakers that you have is donated to another language like English, you see, already you've starved your language of its man-dollar value. So each time the Oxford University Press reviews its dictionary and they say, they've now allowed Agbada on the Oxford, it's now the Damfo, and I came to you, I visited your house severally. They say, all these have been admitted into English. That is loss of our language. The reason why Agbada will become an English word is because there is a concept that the English language does not represent, and the English language has managed to harvest that value into itself. And by so doing, it has deprived the language that originated that word. So we're always excited when these things happen. We don't know that it is to our own loss. It's reducing the man-dollar value of our own language, of our own languages, whilst it is increasing the man-dollar value of the English language. So once you start looking at it from this man-dollar value, what I have succeeded in doing is bringing the culture and the economics together so that you now see that they are intertwined and one informs the other.
I agree with you, because to go back to the music and the surrogate speech right now. So let's go back into that music realm again. I think to bring this back to the music realm is simply to start thinking about how much visibility do we command or attract in terms of local music productions. Let's start from the art music realm, for instance, what we call African art music in Nigeria today. It has become a big cultural sphere on the one hand, but locally it is popular, even within the academic it's popular, but even on the outside of the academia, people don't really give, it doesn't really command that value compared to you playing Beethoven or Mozart. And that's why today we have layers of composer. Even though when some appear to, when they present themselves as composer, and they are composing songs in their own local languages. Then we see them reproducing Mozart. Like going back to your earlier example of Waba Migbe, Abide With Me. The same thing we see today. That's on the art music side. Then on the popular music side, we have the same problem, replicating in that area also. For instance, look at the Grammy issue, the recent Grammy issue. So Grammy came up last year, and they came up with one category for all African popular music. So calling them African music. So within this category, what Nigeria are packaging as Afrobeat, trying to negotiate a global visibility for the industry, the Grammy packed all the variances across Africa under the African music rubrics. That's when we follow your mandala analysis, is trying to, mute the local voices, the local uniqueness, and trying to force them to respond to the terms of the American music industry. And that is what happened exactly, during the last Grammy Award. So in essence, what is local, what is unique, it is not identified, are not, recognized by them. So they call it what they can call it, what they feel it should be, because of their own economic power on local production. But let's put it in other way around. If the Nigerian music industry or the Nigerian academia are powerful enough through the help of policy and the government to channel their production towards a kind of political tool, economic tool, and finance local voices, if these genres, music production, styles, if they are visible and sponsored locally, Nigerians will not need validation from the outside world. And because they can stand on their own, the outside world will be forced to look inward to Nigeria to see what are these guys. The same way everybody is looking into BRICS right now. These guys are surviving. What are they doing that is special? Everybody is applying to join BRICS every day, almost every day. The same way, the same logic can be adopted, from the Nigerian perspective, both for art music, music education, and popular music, like this issue of Grammy. Then the question is, to go back to your early point, how do we start pushing towards policy that promotes or reinforce these local approaches to issues of production? Because you explain it, you unpack it beautifully, but the question is that, does the policy recognize it that way? Perhaps that's a question.
I wonder how many Chinese musicians struggle to win the Grammy.
Okay. Okay.
Even German musicians.
That's true.
Yeah, I have nothing against young people. I mean, Afrobeats has become a world phenomenon. I was in Siberia sometime last year, and I was sitting with a Vietnamese lady. She was asking me questions about Nigeria. And as we were talking, what did I hear in the public address system in the restaurant? Calm down, calm down. It's another banger. I said, oh, that's Nigerian music. Yeah, that helps. But we have values that we tend to throw away. I think I can't remember whether I mentioned last week that before telegraphy was invented in 1844, the talking drum was the fastest means of telecommunications. Because it takes about, a human being takes about 5 kilometers, can deliver information about 5 kilometers an hour. Maybe you can put this on the screen. The homing pigeon can do 88 kilometers an hour. The Pony Express, 100 kilometers an hour. The talking drum being the speed of sound, 1,234 roughly kilometers an hour.
Wow.
So it means there was a time in history around just before 1850 where the talking drum was the fastest means of telecommunications. It was so serious that at least there are 2 references in history to the banning of drumming among slaves in the New World, because they were able to use talking drums to communicate and organize slave riots. And the people who are making efforts to quell the slave riots needed so much time to get the messages across. Meanwhile, these slaves are getting communication within seconds with their talking drum. At least 2 occasions in which there were banning. Even in colonial Lagos, there was a time that drumming was banned, ostensibly for reasons of noise. But it is not totally unconnected with the fact that it takes days to carry the DO, the district officer, on a hammock and walk around the place. And before they get there, they have communicated with drums. Now,
wow.
How many languages have that facility? Now, we who have that facility, we look at talking with drums as a pastime of some uneducated. Whereas when you meet a master talking drummer, that is a virtuoso musician. But we don't put value on it. So these are some of the reasons why our circumstances go the way they go. So if, with what I've just said about the talking drum, there's nothing that stops us from using principles of speech surrogacy to improve telecommunications with present digital technology in such a way that it gives advantage to our languages. And again, I say, it is not rocket science. It's not something we have to go to China to go and... The know-how is available. It's just that we don't have sufficient confidence in ourselves to start implementing these things, taking them seriously, and using them. If we behave like this, we don't even need to join BRICS, because our telecommunication costs will come down. If I guarantee you that, well, to communicate on your cell phone, I can make the communications a lot cheaper because I can ignore sending the consonants and the vowels. We send only the tones, and yet at the other end, the statements, the communication is still achieved, which means we can be communicating with much less bandwidth, which means therefore that telecommunications will be a lot cheaper due to the advantage that our language has presented. But we don't take account of that. We don't care. We don't even see it. And when people say it, they feel you are talking, you are romanticizing. But no, it is clear situation of culture making a demand of technology.
Wow. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Adegbola. At this important juncture, we need to then, open the platform for our friends and colleagues online. So, the platform is open for you to ask Dr. Adegbola or to engage him further on this important, analysis and perspective from the perspective of music and from any other perspective angles you wish to, approach this conversation today. So kindly raise your hand, then we'll unmute you to ask your question. Thank you.